The moonlight caught the blood on Clara's bare feet as she stumbled through the undergrowth, each step a fresh negotiation with pain. 3 weeks. 3 weeks of sleeping in hollowed logs and drinking from streams, of rationing the handful of dried meat she'd managed to grab before fleeing, of pressing her hand against her swollen belly and whispering promises she wasn't certain she could keep. Just a little further, just until we find somewhere safe. Her wolf, usually so present, had gone quiet days ago, conserving energy, she hoped, rather than giving up entirely. The borderlands between pack territories were lawless spaces, unclaimed and dangerous, but they were also the only places a branded trader could travel without being killed on sight. Clara paused against a birch tree, its white bark cool against her fevered skin. 7 months pregnant, alone, and marked. She could still feel the phantom burn of the brand on her left shoulder blade, the jagged A that proclaimed her an adulteress to any wolf who saw it. Caspian had held her down himself while the iron seared her flesh. "You think I don't know?" His voice echoed in her memory, sharp with disgust. "You think I can't smell another male on you? That pup isn't mine, and everyone will know it." She'd screamed her innocence until her throat bled. There was no other male. There had never been anyone but Caspian, her arranged mate since childhood, the wolf she'd tried desperately to love despite his coldness. But he'd looked at her swelling belly with such hatred, and she'd understood, finally, horribly, that the truth didn't matter. He needed her gone. A branch snapped somewhere to her left. Clara froze, her heart slamming against her ribs. The forest had gone silent in that particular way that meant predator. She pressed herself deeper into the shadows, one hand curved protectively over her stomach, the other braced against the tree trunk. Please, please not now. Footsteps, multiple sets, moving with the coordinated precision of a patrol. She caught the edge of unfamiliar scents, pine and wood smoke, and something wilder, earthier than her former pack's territory. Not Starfall wolves then. Someone else. That should have been a relief. Instead, Clara felt the last of her hope crumble. She'd crossed into claimed territory without realizing it. In her exhaustion, she'd wandered past some border marker in the darkness, and trespassing into another alpha's lands while branded. The punishment was death. No trial, no questions, no mercy for packless traitors. Run! Her wolf finally stirred, urgent and weak. Run now. But Clara's legs wouldn't obey. The baby shifted inside her, pressing against her spine, and a wave of dizziness nearly sent her to her knees. She couldn't run. She could barely stand. The first wolf emerged from the trees in human form, a massive male with braided red hair and a scar bisecting his left eyebrow. His eyes swept over her, cataloging her bare feet, her torn dress, her protruding belly, the exhaustion carved into every line of her body. When his gaze caught the brand visible through her shredded sleeve, his expression hardened into stone. "Well," he said, voice flat, "what do we have here?" 2 more wolves materialized from the shadows flanking her. Clara recognized the formation, a capture triangle, designed to prevent escape. Not that she could have escaped a determined pup at this point, let alone trained warriors. "I didn't know," she managed, her voice a ragged whisper. "I didn't realize I'd crossed the border. Please, save it." The red-haired wolf produced iron chains from his belt, and Clara's stomach lurched. "Packless female, branded adulteress, trespassing on Wildfire territory. You'll explain yourself to the Alpha King." Wildfire. The word hit her like a physical blow. Of all the territories she could have stumbled into, she'd found the most dangerous one. Alpha King Lachlan Wildfire was legendary, brutal in battle, merciless to enemies, and utterly unforgiving of those who violated his borders. The stories said he'd once executed an entire diplomatic envoy for arriving unannounced. Clara didn't resist as they chained her wrists. What would be the point? She was dead either way. At least this would be faster than starving in the forest. I'm sorry, she thought at the baby. I tried. I'm so sorry I couldn't protect you. The chains were heavier than she'd expected. The iron bit into her wrists as the patrol forced her forward, and she had to concentrate on placing each foot carefully to avoid falling. The red-haired wolf, their leader, she assumed, kept glancing back at her with an expression she couldn't read. Not quite pity. Something closer to curiosity. How long have you been in the borderlands? He asked, after they'd walked in silence for what felt like hours. Clara's throat was too dry for speech. She simply held up 3 fingers. His scarred eyebrow rose. 3 days? She shook her head. 3 weeks. He let out a low whistle. Pregnant, alone, in winter borderlands for 3 weeks. You're either incredibly lucky or incredibly stubborn. Both, Clara rasped. Neither. I don't know anymore. The wolf studied her for a long moment. Something shifted in his expression. Still not pity, but perhaps a grudging respect. The Alpha King will decide your fate. But for what it's worth, he's not as quick to execute as the stories say. He prefers to know the truth first. Clara wanted to laugh. The truth. As if the truth had ever saved her from anything. They walked for another hour before the trees began to thin. Clara smelled the territory before she saw it. Smoke from hundreds of hearths, the layered scents of a massive pack, and underneath it all, something else. Something that made her wolf lift her head for the first time in days, suddenly alert. What is that? She didn't have time to analyze the sensation before the forest opened onto a valley, and her breath caught in her throat. The wildfire stronghold rose from the earth like it had grown there, a fortress of dark stone and ancient timber, sprawling across the valley floor with smaller buildings clustered around it like cubs around a mother wolf. Torches blazed along the walls despite the late hour, and Clara could see guards moving on the battlements, their silhouettes sharp against the star-scattered sky. It was beautiful. It was terrifying. It was the last thing she would ever see. The gates opened at their approach, and Clara forced herself to stand straighter despite the chains, despite the exhaustion, despite the terror clawing at her chest. If she was going to die, she would do it with what little dignity she had left. For herself. For her baby. I won't beg, she promised herself. Whatever he does to me, I won't give them the satisfaction of watching me beg. The patrol led her through winding corridors lit by flickering torches, past curious eyes and whispered speculation. She heard fragments. Pregnant. Branded. Packless. And felt each word like another stone added to the weight she was already carrying. Finally, they reached a set of massive double doors carved with running wolves. The red-haired patrol leader stepped forward and spoke quietly to the guards stationed there. One of them disappeared inside. Minutes passed. Clara's legs trembled with the effort of remaining upright. The baby kicked. Once. Twice. Restless and uncomfortable with her stress. Soon, she thought at it. It will be over soon. The doors swung open. The throne room beyond was cavernous, lit by a massive fire pit in its center and dozens of iron chandeliers overhead. Tapestries depicting hunts and battles covered the walls, and the floor was polished stone that reflected the firelight like dark water. But Clara barely noticed any of it. Her entire awareness had narrowed to the figure seated on the throne at the far end of the hall. He was larger than she'd expected, broad-shouldered and powerfully built, with dark hair that fell past his jaw, and a face that looked like it had been carved from the same stone as his fortress. But it was his eyes that caught her, held her, refused to let her look away. They were the deep amber of autumn leaves, and they were fixed on her with an intensity that made her wolf surge suddenly, violently, against her skin. What? The guards forced her forward, and she went, her legs moving without her permission, closer, closer to those burning eyes, to the scent that was growing stronger with every step. pine and wood smoke, and something wild, something that was making her blood sing in her veins. 10 feet from the throne, the guards shoved her to her knees. The chains clinked against the stone floor. Clara's palms scraped raw as she caught herself, her belly pulling painfully against the position. But she lifted her head, refusing to cower, and met the Alpha King's gaze directly. Heat exploded through her chest. It was like nothing she'd ever felt, a golden warmth that started at her heart and spread outward, flooding her veins, racing along her nerves, setting every inch of her skin alight. Her wolf howled, the sound echoing through her mind with a recognition that made no sense, that couldn't possibly be real. Mate, mate, mate. On the throne, Alpha King Lachlan Wildfire rose to his feet. His nostrils flared, his pupils dilating until amber nearly swallowed black. A low growl rumbled from his chest, not threatening, but something rawer, something primal and involuntary. He descended the steps, and his guards scrambled backward like they'd seen this before and knew to give him space. His eyes never left hers. His hands were shaking. This ruthless, legendary king, trembling as he crossed the distance between them. Clara couldn't breathe. The bond was wrapping around her heart like golden thread, pulling tight, anchoring her to this stranger with a certainty that defied everything she thought she knew about herself, about her life, about what was possible. "Remove her chains," Lachlan commanded, and his voice was rough, scraped raw with shock. The guards rushed to obey. The iron fell away from her wrists, and Clara gasped at the sudden relief. But the Alpha King was already there, dropping to one knee before her so their eyes were level, his massive frame blocking out everything else in the world. This close, his scent was overwhelming. Her wolf pressed against her skin, desperate to get closer, and Clara felt the baby shift inside her, responding to something she couldn't explain. "What is your name?" he asked, barely above a whisper. Clara's voice emerged as a croak. "Clara, Clara Stormborn." His hand lifted, hovering beside her face without touching, and she watched his jaw clench with the effort of restraint. His eyes searched hers, desperate, hungry, disbelieving. "Clara," he repeated, and her name in his mouth sounded like a prayer. "How is this possible? Who did this to you?" She opened her mouth to answer, but her vision was blurring, her exhausted body finally reaching its absolute limit. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was the Alpha King's expression, fierce and protective, and utterly, impossibly, hers. Clara surfaced slowly like rising through honey-thick water. Warmth surrounded her, not the feverish heat of illness, but something softer, safer. Blankets, a mattress beneath her that felt like clouds after weeks of forest floors and hollow logs. She kept her eyes closed, cataloging sensations the way her mother had taught her. Listen first, smell second. Then look. Fire crackling nearby. The distant murmur of voices beyond a closed door. Her own heartbeat, steady now instead of the panicked flutter she'd grown accustomed to. And underneath it all, a presence. Someone close. Someone whose scent wrapped around her like a second blanket, pine and wood smoke, and that wild, earthy note that made her wolf stir restlessly beneath her skin. The Alpha King. The memories crashed back. The patrol, the chains, the throne room, and then heat flooded her chest again, an echo of that impossible golden warmth. Her wolf pressed forward so hard Clara nearly gasped aloud. "Mate," her wolf insisted. "Ours." Clara's eyes flew open. She was in a bedchamber, not a dungeon. The space was large, but not ostentatious. Stone walls softened by tapestries in deep reds and golds, heavy wooden furniture worn smooth by generations of use, a fire burning steadily in a hearth carved with running wolves. Moonlight streamed through tall windows, mixing with firelight to paint everything in shades of amber and silver. And there, in a chair pulled close to the bed, sat Lachlan Wildfire. He hadn't noticed she was awake. His massive frame was hunched forward, elbows braced on his knees, dark hair falling across his face as he stared at the floor. In the shifting light, the sharp angles of his features seemed softer. Not the legendary Alpha King who executed trespassers, but a man wrestling with something he didn't understand. Clara should have been terrified. She was packless, branded, completely at his mercy. Instead, she found herself studying the way firelight caught the strands of silver threading through his dark hair, the tension coiled in his shoulders. The way his hands, large enough to crush her throat without effort, were clasped together so tightly his knuckles had gone white. Her wolf pressed forward again, and this time a small sound escaped Clara's lips. A soft exhale that shattered the silence. Lachlan's head snapped up. For one suspended heartbeat, they simply stared at each other. Then it happened again. The bond surging between them like a living thing, golden threads wrapping tighter around Clara's heart. Warmth flooded through her veins, pooling low in her belly, racing along her nerves until her entire body hummed with awareness. His eyes blazed amber in the firelight, not the cool autumn shade she'd seen in the throne room, but something brighter, more intense. The wolf looking out through human eyes. She watched his nostrils flare, catching her scent, and heard the low rumble that built in his chest before he could stop it. "You're awake." His voice was rough, scraped raw. "The healer said you needed rest, that you'd pushed yourself past breaking." Clara's hand moved instinctively to her belly. "The baby is fine." He rose from the chair and she was struck again by the sheer size of him. Even standing across the room, he seemed to fill the space, commanding attention without trying. "Strong heartbeat. The healer says you're malnourished and exhausted, but the pup is resilient." Relief crashed through her so hard her eyes burned. She'd spent 3 weeks terrified that she was slowly killing her child, that her desperate flight had doomed them both. To hear that the baby was strong, was healthy. A tear slipped down her cheek before she could stop it. Lachlan went utterly still. Something flickered across his face, an expression she couldn't name, caught between anguish and yearning. He took a single step toward the bed, then stopped himself with visible effort, his hands clenching at his sides. "I won't hurt you." The words seemed torn from somewhere deep in his chest. "Whatever you've heard about me, whatever stories they tell in other territories, I would never harm my mate." The word hung in the air between them. Mate. Clara's wolf howled in recognition, in desperate longing, but her human mind recoiled. "That's not possible," she whispered. "I was mated to Caspian. The bond was sealed when I was 18. I can't. There's no way." The bond was sealed but never completed. Lachlan's jaw tightened. "You bear no marking bite, I would have seen it." Clara's hand flew to her neck, to the unmarked skin where a true mate's claim would rest. He was right. Caspian had always found excuses to delay the final marking. Too busy, not the right time, better to wait until after the alliance was secured. She'd told herself it was politics. She'd believed his reasons. She'd been such a fool. "A sealed bond without marking can be broken," Lachlan continued, each word careful, controlled. "If the male rejects his mate, if he casts her out." His eyes searched her face. "He rejected you. I can smell it on you. The wound of it, the severing. You're unmated, Clara. And you are mine." The absolute certainty in his voice made her shiver. Not with fear, or not entirely with fear. Something else trembled beneath her skin, something that responded to his possessiveness like a flower turning towards sun. "This doesn't make sense." Her voice cracked. "True mates are rare. The chances of finding one after an arranged bond fails. Astronomical." He took another step closer, and Clara felt the pull between them intensify, the invisible thread drawing taut. And yet here we are. You stumbled onto my territory, into my throne room, and my wolf recognized you before my mind could catch up. His laugh was humorless. I've spent 32 years alone, Clara. Turned down every political match, ignored every she-wolf who threw herself at me, waited for something I wasn't even certain existed. And then you appeared, pregnant, branded, broken, and I knew. He was close enough now that she could feel the heat radiating from his body, close enough to see the faint tremor in his hands, the way his chest rose and fell with deliberately measured breaths. He was holding himself back. This legendary king, this ruthless alpha, was trembling with the effort of not touching her. I know you're afraid, he said quietly. I know you have every reason to distrust males who claim ownership of you. I watched you kneel in my throne room with your chin raised, ready to die rather than cower. Something raw flickered through his amber eyes. You expected me to execute you. You expected cruelty. And instead, you felt this. Clara pressed her hand to her heart, where the bond pulsed warm and golden. I feel it too. I don't understand it, but I feel it. The sound Lachlan made was almost wounded. He dropped to one knee beside the bed. This Alpha King, the most powerful wolf in 5 territories, kneeling before a packless, pregnant refugee. His eyes were level with hers now, and she could see everything in them. Hope and fear and desperate, aching tenderness. I'm going to take care of you, he said. You and your pup both, not because I claim you, but because you are my mate, and caring for you is the only thing that matters to me now. His hand lifted, hovering near her cheek, not quite touching. But I will not force anything. Not a touch. Not a word. Not a single moment you don't freely give. Do you understand? Clara's breath caught. In her entire life, no male had ever offered her choice. Her father had arranged her mating to Caspian before she could walk. Caspian had treated her like property, tolerating her presence when useful, discarding her when she became inconvenient. Even the kindest wolves in her former pack had viewed her as a vessel for alliance, a womb to produce heirs. And here was the Alpha King of Wildfire, the most feared wolf on the continent, asking her permission to touch her face. I understand, she whispered. Lachlan's hand slowly lowered, his fingertips brushing her cheek so gently she might have imagined it. The contact sent warmth cascading through her, the bond singing, her wolf pressing desperately toward the surface. His eyes fluttered closed, and she heard his sharp intake of breath, felt the fine tremor that ran through him at even this small touch. Rest, he said, pulling his hand back with visible effort. I'll have food sent up when you wake again. Proper food, not whatever scraps you've been surviving on. He rose to his feet, and she could see what the restraint was costing him, every line of his body rigid with tension. The door will be guarded, but not to keep you in, to keep everyone else out. No one enters without your permission. He turned toward the door, and Clara's wolf surged so hard she spoke without thinking. Wait. Lachlan stopped, looking back over his shoulder. Firelight caught his profile, turning him into something ancient and beautiful and entirely hers. Earlier, Clara said softly, in the throne room, you said you would guard my door yourself. Something cracked in his carefully controlled expression. You heard that? Just before I passed out. She swallowed hard. Did you mean it? For a long moment he simply looked at her. Then, slowly, a smile curved his lips. Not the hard smile of a king, but something tender and private and meant only for her. I'll be right outside, he said. All night. Every night until you tell me otherwise. He slipped through the door, closing it softly behind him. Clara lay in the darkness, one hand pressed to her racing heart, the other curved protectively over her belly. He's going to sleep in the hallway, she thought dazedly. The Alpha King is going to sleep on a stone floor because I'm afraid to have him in my room. Her wolf purred with satisfaction, and for the first time in 3 weeks, Clara fell asleep without fear. She woke to sunlight and the smell of food. A tray had been placed on the bedside table, bread still warm from the oven, sliced meat, a pot of honey, fresh berries, and a pitcher of what smelled like herb-infused water. Clara's stomach cramped so violently at the sight that she nearly cried. She didn't remember the last time she'd eaten a real meal. The dried meat she'd fled with had run out days ago. Since then, she'd survived on whatever she could forage: roots, bitter leaves, the occasional half-frozen berry she'd found beneath the snow. Clara reached for the bread, then hesitated. In stories, captive maidens were always drugged through their food. She should be cautious, should test it somehow. Her wolf huffed impatiently. He's our mate. He would never. And despite every instinct screaming at her to be careful, Clara believed it. She tore into the bread, barely pausing to breathe between bites. The honey was sweet on her tongue, the meat perfectly seasoned, the berries bursting with juice that ran down her chin. She ate until her stomach ached, then forced herself to stop, afraid of making herself sick after so long without proper food. A knock sounded at the door. Clara tensed, pulling the blankets higher. Yes? The door opened to reveal a she-wolf with silver-streaked auburn hair and keen gray eyes. She was older, perhaps 50 in human years, with the bearing of a warrior gone to comfortable retirement. She carried a bundle of cloth in her arms and moved with careful, deliberate steps. Lady Clara. The woman inclined her head respectfully. I'm Morgana, the Alpha King's head of household. He asked me to bring you fresh clothing and see to your needs. Her eyes flicked to the empty tray. I see you've eaten. Good. You need your strength. Lady Clara, as if she were someone important, rather than a packless refugee in borrowed sheets. I'm not... Clara started. The Alpha King's true mate? Morgana's lips twitched. Forgive me, but the entire stronghold heard his declaration last night. You are Lady Clara now, and you'll find we take that quite seriously. She set the clothing on the foot of the bed, a soft wool dress in deep green, thick stockings, and sturdy boots. Everything looked warm and practical, and far finer than anything Clara had owned in her former pack. There will be gossip, Morgana continued matter-of-factly. There always is when a king finds his mate, and your circumstances are unusual. Some will whisper, others will stare. Her gray eyes met Clara's directly. But the Alpha King has made his position clear. Anyone who offers you disrespect answers to him, and Lachlan Wildfire is not known for his mercy toward those who displease him. A shiver traced down Clara's spine. She'd been so wrapped up in her own terror, her own disbelief, that she hadn't considered how this must look to others. A branded female, heavy with another male's pup, suddenly elevated to the highest position in the pack. They would hate her. Of course they would hate her. The Alpha King requested that I serve as your companion until you're comfortable here, Morgana added. But only if you find that acceptable. If you prefer someone else. No. Clara's voice came out sharper than she intended. No, I would appreciate that. Thank you. Morgana's expression softened almost imperceptibly. I'll wait outside while you dress. Take your time. She slipped back through the door, and Clara stared after her for a long moment before pushing back the blankets. Getting dressed was harder than expected. Her body ached in ways she'd been ignoring for weeks, and her belly seemed to have grown overnight, making even the simple act of pulling on stockings an exercise in creative positioning. But the dress fit perfectly. Someone had taken careful measurements while she slept, or else simply had an excellent eye, and the boots were sturdy without being clumsy. She caught her reflection in a polished bronze mirror and barely recognized herself. The wild-eyed animal she'd become in the borderlands was gone. In her place stood a woman, thin, yes, with shadows beneath her eyes and cheekbones too sharp, but a woman nonetheless. A woman wearing green wool and a confused expression, one hand resting on the swell of new life beneath her ribs. "You survived," she told her reflection. "Now figure out what comes next." The hallway outside her door was empty except for two guards who snapped to attention when she emerged. Morgana appeared seemingly from nowhere, falling into step beside her. "The Alpha King is in council this morning," she said, "but he asked me to show you the grounds if you felt well enough. Fresh air does wonders for expectant mothers." Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. She followed Morgana through corridors she barely remembered from the night before, trying to memorize turns and landmarks. The stronghold was larger than it had seemed in the darkness, a maze of stone and timber, with narrow windows that let in slices of winter light. They passed other wolves as they walked. Some nodded respectfully. Others stared openly, their gazes dropping to Clara's belly before rising to her face with poorly concealed judgment. She heard the whispers start before they'd even turned the first corner. "Packless, I heard, branded as an adulteress, can you imagine? Another male's pup, and the king wants to claim her." Clara's shoulders tightened. She kept her chin up, her gaze forward, but each whisper landed like a blow. Her wolf snarled in protective fury, but there was nothing to fight, no one to confront. Just words, floating like poison on the air. They emerged into a courtyard, and Clara gratefully gulped the cold morning air. Snow dusted the ground, pristine and white, and the sky above was the pale blue of winter's grip. She could see the mountains from here, distant peaks capped with ice, standing sentinel over the valley. "It's beautiful," she said quietly. Morgana nodded. "The wildfire territory has been held by the same bloodline for 600 years. The king's ancestors chose this valley for its defensibility, but they stayed for its beauty." She gestured toward a path leading through carefully tended gardens, now sleeping beneath the snow. "Shall we walk?" They had barely taken 10 steps when a new voice cut through the morning air. "So this is the notorious adulteress." Clara froze. Morgana turned sharply, her entire bearing shifting from companion to protector. A group of wolves stood near the garden's edge, 3 males and 2 females, all dressed in finery that marked them as nobility. The speaker was a golden-haired female with sharp features and sharper eyes, her lips curved in a smile that held no warmth. "I expected something more impressive," the female continued, looking Clara up and down. "Given how quickly our king seems to have lost his mind over her." Her gaze lingered on Clara's belly. "Tell me, is the pup's father still alive? Or did you dispose of him after securing your new conquest?" The other wolves snickered. Clara felt heat rising in her cheeks, shame and rage warring beneath her skin. "Lady Alara." Morgana's voice was ice. "The Alpha King's mate deserves your respect." "The Alpha King's mate?" Alara laughed, the sound like breaking glass. "She's a packless whore who spread her legs for one male and is now trying to trap another. The king may be blinded by whatever trick she's playing, but some of us can see clearly." Clara's wolf surged against her skin, snarling with fury. But before she could speak, before she could move, a new presence slammed into the courtyard with the force of a physical blow. Lachlan Wildfire stood at the courtyard entrance. His amber eyes blazed gold, his chest heaving with barely contained rage. When he spoke, his voice was a thunderclap that shook snow from the nearby branches. "What did you just say?" Alara went pale. The wolves behind her scrambled backward, heads dropping in immediate submission. But the golden-haired female held her ground, even as her lips trembled. "Alpha, you were simply what?" Lachlan stalked forward, and Clara could see his wolf pressing at the surface, claws extending at his fingertips. You were simply insulting my mate in her first hour among my pack? You were simply calling my future queen a whore? His roar echoed off the stone walls, sending birds scattering from nearby rooftops. Every wolf in the courtyard dropped to their knees, heads bowed, necks exposed in absolute submission. Except Clara, who stood rooted to the spot, watching the Alpha King's rage unfold with a mixture of shock and something dangerously close to wonder. Lachlan stopped directly before Alara's kneeling form. His shadow fell across her like a judgment. "Listen carefully," he said, his voice dropping to something far more frightening than a shout. "Clara Stormborn is my true mate, my fated one. The bond between us was sealed the moment she entered my throne room, and it will be marked the moment she allows it." He let that land, let the weight of it press the assembled wolves deeper into the snow. "Her pup will be my heir, not because of blood or birthright, but because I choose it, because she is mine, and everything that is hers becomes mine as well." He turned, his burning gaze sweeping across every watching face. "Anyone who disrespects my mate disrespects me. Anyone who whispers poison about her in my halls forfeits their place in my pack." His lips pulled back, revealing teeth that were too sharp to be fully human. "And anyone who calls her that word again will answer to my wolf directly. Am I understood?" "Yes, Alpha," came the chorus, ragged with fear. Lachlan held the silence for another long moment. Then he turned to Clara, and the rage drained from his features like water from a basin. In its place was something softer, concern, and a desperate hope that she wouldn't look at him differently after witnessing his fury. "Clara," he extended his hand, palm up, offering rather than demanding, "may I escort you inside? The cold isn't good for the pup." Clara's heart was racing, but not with fear. Her wolf purred with fierce satisfaction, pressing toward the surface with renewed hunger. He protected us. He defended us. He called us his queen. She placed her hand in his. The contact sent warmth flooding through her veins, and she watched his eyes flutter closed, a breath shuddering from his chest. "Thank you," she whispered, too quietly for anyone else to hear. "You didn't have to." "Yes," he said, his fingers curling gently around hers. "I did." They walked together toward the stronghold entrance, and Clara felt the weight of dozens of stares on her back. But this time, the gazes held something different. Not judgment, not contempt. Respect. And perhaps a little fear. She should have been troubled by that. She should have been worried about what it meant, being protected so fiercely by someone so dangerous. Instead, Clara found herself leaning slightly closer to Lachlan's warmth, her wolf settling into something that felt terrifyingly like peace. Maybe, she allowed herself to think, maybe this could be real. The stronghold's warmth enveloped Clara like a blanket as Lachlan guided her through the massive doors. Her hand still rested in his, and she found she didn't want to pull away. The mate bond hummed between them, a constant golden thread that seemed to strengthen with every moment of contact. "You're trembling," Lachlan said quietly, pausing in the entrance hall. His thumb traced a gentle circle against her palm. Clara hadn't realized she was shaking. The confrontation in the courtyard had left her nerves raw, stripped bare by the intensity of his defense. "I'm not used to anyone speaking for me." His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "You won't have to get used to silence again, not here." Before she could respond, footsteps echoed from the corridor ahead. Morgana appeared, her silver-streaked auburn hair catching the torchlight. The older female's gray eyes swept over them both, lingering on their joined hands with unmistakable approval. "Alpha, the delegation from Starfall territory has arrived." Clara's blood turned to ice. Lachlan's hand tightened around hers, not painfully, but firmly, an anchor against the panic flooding her system. "When?" "Within the hour. They requested an immediate audience, citing urgent diplomatic matters." Morgana's gaze shifted to Clara, and something protective flickered there. They brought documents and a formal petition. Starfall, Caspian's pack. The name alone sent Clara's wolf cowering. 3 weeks of freedom, 3 weeks of running, and they had found her already. Of course they had. She was carrying evidence of her supposed crime in her own body, the swell of her belly a constant reminder of what Caspian had accused her of. Clara. Lachlan's voice cut through the spiraling terror. She looked up to find his amber eyes fixed on her face, steady and calm despite the tension radiating from his frame. No one from Starfall will touch you. Do you understand? They cannot compel you to leave my territory. They'll say I'm theirs to punish. Her voice came out thin, reedy. Pack justice for adultery. They can demand my return under the old laws. The old laws also recognize mate bonds. His free hand rose to cup her cheek, and Clara felt her wolf surge toward the contact, desperate for his steadiness. You are my mate. That supersedes any claim they think they have. You haven't marked me. The words fell out before she could stop them, brutal in their honesty. Without the bite, the bond is incomplete. Any pack elder could argue. Then we mark each other now. Clara's breath caught. His eyes had shifted, amber bleeding into gold as his wolf pressed forward. The suggestion hung between them, heavy with implication. Lachlan, I don't say this to pressure you. He pulled back slightly, giving her space even as his wolf clearly wanted to close the distance. I say it because you're right about the technicality, but I will not claim you out of strategy. When we mark each other, if we mark each other, it will be because you want it, not because you need protection. The fierce protectiveness in his voice made something crack behind Clara's ribs. The numbness she'd carried for months began to splinter at the edges. Alpha. Morgana's voice was carefully neutral. The delegation waits. Lachlan exhaled slowly. Put them in the eastern receiving chamber. I'll see them within the hour. He looked back at Clara. You don't have to be there. I can handle this alone. But Clara's spine straightened, her wolf bristling at the thought of hiding. She had cowered enough. She had begged and screamed and bled, and none of it had mattered. Caspian had still held her down while the iron brand seared her flesh. No, she said, surprised by the steel in her own voice. I want to face them. Lachlan's eyes flickered with something that might have been pride. Then you'll face them at my side. The eastern receiving chamber was smaller than the throne room but no less imposing. Dark wood paneling lined the walls, carved with running wolves and ancient symbols Clara didn't recognize. A fire blazed in the massive hearth, casting dancing shadows across the assembled figures. 3 wolves waited near the center of the room. 2 were clearly guards, broad-shouldered males with the blank expressions of trained warriors. But the third? Clara's heart stopped. Caspian Starfall stood between them, his golden hair gleaming in the firelight. He was exactly as she remembered, handsome in that sharp, almost delicate way that had once made her young heart flutter. His blue eyes swept the room with practiced confidence, and when they landed on Clara, his lips curved into a smile that made her stomach turn. Clara. He said her name like a caress, like they were old lovers reuniting rather than a male who had held her down while she screamed. You look well. Pregnancy suits you. Lachlan's growl rolled through the chamber like thunder. You will address my mate with respect, or you will not address her at all. Caspian's smile didn't falter, but something dangerous flickered in his eyes. Your mate? How fascinating. I wasn't aware the Alpha King had found his fated one. His gaze dropped pointedly to Clara's unmarked neck. Though I notice the claiming remains incomplete. State your business. Lachlan's voice was ice. He hadn't released Clara's hand, and she could feel the tension thrumming through him, his wolf barely leashed beneath the surface. Caspian reached into his traveling cloak and withdrew a rolled parchment. I come as official envoy from the Starfall Pack. with a formal petition for the return of Clara Stormborn to face pack justice. He held the document toward Lachlan. She stands accused of adultery and bearing a pup of unknown parentage. Our laws are clear on such matters. Your laws have no jurisdiction in my territory. Perhaps not. Caspian's smile widened, but the Council of Pax might feel differently. I've already filed notice with them. The hearing is set for 7 days hence. Clara felt the blood drain from her face. The Council of Pax, the ancient governing body that mediated disputes between territories. Their word was law, superseding even an Alpha King's authority in matters of cross-pack justice. You planned this. Her voice came out hoarse. You knew exactly where I would run. Caspian turned to her, and the mask of pleasantry slipped, revealing something cold and calculating beneath. You were always predictable, Clara, running toward the only territory powerful enough to protect you. He stepped closer, and Lachlan's warning growl intensified. Did you think I wouldn't follow? Did you think I would simply let you go? You rejected me. The words tore from her throat. You cast me out. You branded me. I did what was necessary. His voice dropped, meant only for her ears, though Clara knew Lachlan could hear every word. You should have accepted your fate quietly. Instead, you ran like a coward, and now you force my hand. What do you want, Caspian? Lachlan's question cracked like a whip. Speak plainly or leave my hall. Caspian straightened, the pleasant mask sliding back into place. I want what's rightfully mine, Alpha King. The female was promised to my family before she could walk. Our bond was sealed when she came of age. She carries what should be a Starfall heir. You rejected her, Lachlan said flatly. You broke the bond. I rejected her infidelity, not her. Caspian's smile turned sharp. There's a difference, legally speaking. The council will want to examine the evidence. They'll want to determine the pup's true parentage. His eyes locked on Clara's belly with an intensity that made her want to shield herself. And if the pup proves to be mine, well, then Clara returns to Starfall, and your claim becomes meaningless. The implication hung in the air like poison. Clara's hand flew to her stomach, instinct driving her to protect the life growing within her. Get out. Lachlan's voice had dropped to something barely human. Before I forget the laws of diplomatic sanctuary and tear out your throat. Caspian didn't flinch. He simply bowed with exaggerated courtesy and backed toward the door. 7 days, Alpha King. I look forward to the council's wisdom. His gaze found Clara one last time. Think about what I said, Clara. There are easier ways to end this. For everyone. The door closed behind him and Clara's legs buckled. Lachlan caught her before she could fall, sweeping her into his arms with a gentleness that contradicted the fury still blazing in his eyes. Morgana, double the guards. No one from that delegation moves through my territory without an escort. Yes, Alpha. Morgana's voice was tight with barely contained rage of her own. Clara pressed her face against Lachlan's chest, breathing in his scent, pine and musk and something darker, more primal. Her wolf whined, pressing toward him like he was the only solid thing in a world gone liquid. He's going to take my baby. The words came out muffled against his shirt. The council will believe his lies. They always believe the Alpha's son over the packless female. Clara. Lachlan set her down on a cushioned bench near the fire, kneeling before her as he had in the throne room hours earlier. His hands cupped her face, forcing her to meet his burning gaze. Listen to me carefully. Caspian Starfall will not take your pup. He will not take you. I don't care what evidence he forges or what petitions he files. You can't stop the council. I can stop him. The certainty in his voice was absolute. I have spent 32 years as Alpha King. I have crushed rebellions, ended wars, united territories that had feuded for centuries. Do you think I cannot outmaneuver one scheming noble who was too foolish to recognize the treasure standing before him? His thumb brushed away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. He rejected you, Clara. He branded you. He threw away the most precious gift the moon goddess can grant, a true mate's bond waiting to bloom, because he was too blind to see what you are. What am I? She whispered. Strong. He said it like a prayer. Brave. Fierce enough to survive 3 weeks alone in the borderlands while 7 months pregnant. And mine. His forehead dropped to rest against hers. Mine, if you'll have me. Not because of politics or protection, because when I look at you, my wolf knows peace for the first time in 3 decades. Clara's breath shattered in her chest. Her wolf rose, pressing against her skin with desperate hunger. I'm afraid, she admitted. I've been afraid for so long. I don't know how to stop. Then be afraid. His voice was impossibly gentle. Be afraid and let me be brave for both of us until you remember how. The fire crackled. Somewhere beyond the walls, snow continued to fall, and Clara, for the first time in 3 weeks, perhaps for the first time in years, allowed herself to lean into someone else's strength. Lachlan gathered her against his chest, and they stayed there as the flames burned low, 2 wolves learning the shape of each other's stillness. The days that followed blurred together in a strange mixture of comfort and dread. Clara found herself installed in chambers adjacent to Lachlan's own, close enough that she could feel the hum of the mate bond even through stone walls. Morgana assigned 3 she-wolves as companions and guards, their presence both protective and watchful. But it was the quiet moments that undid her. On the 3rd night, Clara woke gasping from a nightmare, Caspian's face above her, the brand glowing orange in his hand, her own screams echoing off empty walls. She stumbled from her bed, desperate for air, and found Lachlan waiting in the corridor. I heard you through the bond, he said simply. Your fear woke me. She should have been embarrassed. Instead, she felt only relief. He walked with her through the silent stronghold, past sleeping guards and moonlit windows, until they reached a small courtyard at the structure's heart. A garden slumbered beneath the snow, ancient trees standing sentinel around a frozen pond. My mother used to tend these grounds, Lachlan said quietly, before she passed. I come here when sleep won't come. Clara sank onto a stone bench, and he settled beside her, close enough to touch, but not quite touching. The cold air bit at her cheeks, but his warmth radiated outward like a furnace. Tell me something, she said. Something real. Something that isn't about politics or pacts or threats. He was silent for a long moment. Then, I was terrified of water as a pup. Clara turned to stare at him. You're joking. My older brother threw me into a river when I was 4. Nearly drowned before our father pulled me out. A rueful smile crossed his face. I didn't swim again until I was 15, and only then because I refused to let fear control me. You had a brother? 2. Both dead now. He said it without self-pity, stating fact. The first fell in a border skirmish before I came of age. The second challenged me for the throne when our father died. I didn't want to kill him, but he gave me no choice. Clara's heart ached. I'm sorry. Don't be. He was cruel, my middle brother. He would have been a tyrant. Lachlan's eyes found hers in the moonlight. Sometimes strength is knowing when to fight. Sometimes it's knowing when to walk away. And sometimes it's surviving long enough to find something worth fighting for. His hand found hers in the darkness. Yes, exactly that. They sat in comfortable silence, breath misting in the cold air, the bond humming warm and bright between them. Clara's wolf had stopped pressing, stopped demanding. She simply existed in this moment. Present. Calm. Almost safe. The council hearing is in 4 days, she said finally. What will happen? Caspian will present his evidence. We will present ours. Lachlan's thumb traced slow circles against her palm. There's something I need to tell you. Something that might help. She tensed. What? The ancient right of truth-speaking. It still exists. A compulsion laid upon wolves by the moon goddess herself. Under its power, no wolf can lie. His eyes met hers. If Caspian is forced to speak under the right, his deceptions will unravel. He won't be able to hide what he truly did to you. Hope flickered in Clara's chest. Fragile, tentative, but present. Can anyone demand the right? Anyone who has been accused. Anyone who wants to prove their innocence. He squeezed her hand. You would need to be brave enough to speak before the council. To face him openly, in front of all the assembled alphas. Fear surged through her, but beneath it, something else stirred. A spark of fury she'd thought had been snuffed out when the brand touched her skin. He branded me as an adulteress, she said slowly. He held me down while I screamed. He threw me into the borderlands to die. Yes. And now he wants to take my pup. The pup he rejected. The pup he called another male's spawn. Yes. Clara's free hand curled into a fist. Heat pulsed beneath her skin, her wolf rising with a snarl that echoed through her bones. Then I'll speak, she said, and her voice didn't waver. I'll demand the right, and I'll watch him choke on every lie he's ever told. Lachlan's eyes blazed gold, and the pride that crossed his features made Clara feel, for the first time in longer than she could remember, like she might actually be the person he seemed to see. That's my mate, he breathed. The morning of the council hearing dawned gray and cold, frost clinging to the windows of the stronghold like crystalline warnings. Clara stood before the mirror in her chambers, Morgana's steady hands fastening the final clasp of her formal dress, deep green velvet that Lachlan had sent to her rooms the night before, rich and regal, nothing like the torn rags she'd arrived in 3 weeks ago. You look like a Luna, Morgana said quietly. Clara's reflection stared back at her, a stranger with fierce eyes and a jaw set against fear. The brand on her shoulder blade was hidden beneath the fabric, but she could still feel it, a phantom ache reminding her of everything Caspian had taken. Today, she would take it back. The Great Hall had been transformed for the council hearing. Representatives from 7 territories filled the benches, their scents mingling into a tapestry of power and politics that made Clara's wolf bristle with unease. At the front of the room, 5 council elders sat behind a curved table of ancient oak, their faces weathered and unreadable. And there, standing before them with practiced confidence, was Caspian Starfall. He looked exactly as she remembered, handsome in that cold, calculated way that had never warmed her blood, his dark hair swept back from a face designed for charm and deception. When his eyes found her across the hall, something flickered in their depths. Surprise, perhaps, that she'd survived. Irritation that she'd found protection. Lachlan's hand pressed against the small of her back as they entered, a silent reminder that she wasn't alone. The assembled wolves rose as the Alpha King passed, bowing their heads in deference, and Clara felt the weight of 100 gazes cataloging her presence at his side. The council recognizes Alpha King Lachlan Wildfire, the eldest council member intoned, and the female Clara Stormborn, who has been accused of adultery and bearing illegitimate offspring. Alpha Caspian Starfall, you may present your petition. Caspian stepped forward, and his voice rang through the hall with practiced sincerity. Honored council, I come before you with a heavy heart. The female you see before you was promised to my family before she could walk. We raised her, we sheltered her, and when she came of age, I sealed the mate bond with her as was my duty. His eyes found Clara's, and the cruelty beneath his polished exterior flickered like a serpent's tongue. Imagine my devastation when I discovered her betrayal, another male's scent on her skin, a pup growing in her belly that carried none of my bloodline markers. I had no choice but to exile her for the protection of my pack's honor. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Clara's hands trembled at her sides, but she forced herself to remain still, to wait. I present to the council documented evidence of her infidelity, Caspian continued, producing a sheaf of papers. Testimonies from pack members who witnessed her inappropriate behavior. Records of her absences during the relevant period. And most damning of all, he paused for effect. The results of a bloodline assessment proving the pup she carries shares no genetic markers with Starfall wolves. The council elder accepted the documents, passing them down the line. Clara watched their faces as they read, watched doubt and judgment settle into the lines around their mouths. Heat rose beneath her skin. Her wolf snarled against the cage of her ribs. Not yet, she told herself. Wait for the moment. These are serious accusations, the eldest council member said finally. Alpha Starfall, you petition for the female's return to Facepack justice. What punishment do you seek? Traditional justice for adultery. Caspian's smile was a blade wrapped in silk. The pup will be taken and placed with a suitable family. The female will serve 5 years of labor in the pack's lower houses before being released to the borderlands. A merciful sentence, given her crimes. Take my baby. The words hit Clara like a physical blow. Her vision narrowed, her heart slamming against her ribs with such force she thought it might crack through bone. All those weeks of running, of starving, of pressing her hands against her belly and promising safety, and still he wanted to rip her child away. Something inside her stopped being afraid. I invoke the ancient right of truth-speaking. Her voice rang through the hall, clear and steady despite the tremor in her hands. The assembled wolves went utterly silent. Even the council elders looked startled, exchanging glances among themselves. Caspian's mask slipped, just for an instant. That right hasn't been called in decades. The right exists in our laws, Clara continued, stepping forward until she stood alone in the center of the hall. Any accused wolf may demand it. Any wolf who wishes to prove their innocence may invoke it. She met the eldest council member's eyes. I am invoking it now. The elder studied her for a long moment. You understand what you're asking, child? Under the right, you too will be compelled to speak only truth. Any lies you've told will be exposed. I have no lies to expose. Clara lifted her chin. But he does. Caspian's face had gone pale beneath his careful composure. This is absurd. The council cannot seriously consider. The right is the female's right, another elder interrupted. If she invokes it, we must honor the old laws. The eldest nodded slowly. So be it. Let the truth-speaking begin. The ritual was simple, but ancient. A circle of salt poured on the stone floor, words spoken in the old tongue that made Clara's wolf shiver with recognition. When the final phrase was uttered, something shifted in the air, a pressure that settled against her skin like the weight of the moon itself. Clara Stormborn, the elder intoned. Under the right of truth-speaking, did you commit adultery during your bond with Alpha Caspian Starfall? The compulsion rose in her throat, irresistible as gravity. No. The word came out ringing with power. I never touched another male. I never wanted another male. Caspian was the only wolf I'd ever been with when I conceived. Murmurs swept through the crowd. The elder's eyes sharpened. Alpha Caspian Starfall. Under the right of truth-speaking, is this pup yours? Caspian's jaw clenched. Sweat beaded at his temples as he fought the compulsion, but the ancient magic was stronger than any wolf's will. When he spoke, the words seemed to tear themselves from his throat. Yes. Gasps echoed through the hall. Clara felt her knees weaken with vindication, with fury, with grief for everything she'd lost because of his cruelty. Did you reject your mate knowing she was innocent? The elder pressed. Yes. The word hissed between Caspian's teeth. His face had gone red. veins standing out in his neck as he struggled against the truth. Yes, I rejected her. I needed her gone. She was inconvenient. Inconvenient how? I had already promised myself to another female. The confession spilled out despite his obvious desperation to stop it. The daughter of the Eastern Alpha, a political alliance that would have tripled my territory. But I couldn't take a second mate while bonded to Clara. The shame would have ruined the arrangement. So He cut himself off with a strangled sound. So you what? Clara's voice cracked through the hall. Tell them, Caspian. Tell them what you did to me. The compulsion seized him. I accused her of adultery to break the bond. I branded her myself. Held her down while she screamed her innocence because I needed her gone quickly, before anyone could question my evidence. I forged the testimonies. I falsified the bloodline assessment. His face twisted with impotent rage. I threw her into the borderlands pregnant and alone because I thought she would die before anyone discovered the truth. Silence. Complete, devastating silence. Clara reached into the hidden pocket of her dress and withdrew a folded piece of paper, creased and worn from weeks pressed against her skin. I have one more piece of evidence, she said, her voice steady now. The rejection letter Caspian sent me the night before he branded me. In his own hand, he writes that my pup is useless to his political ambitions, that my child, our child, was nothing but an obstacle to be removed. She handed the letter to the council elder, who read it with growing disgust. This female speaks truth, the elder announced. Alpha Caspian Starfall has been found guilty of falsifying evidence, unjust branding, and attempted murder of his bonded mate and legitimate offspring. Caspian's composure shattered. His face contorted with rage, and before anyone could react, he lunged across the hall toward Clara, claws extending, a feral snarl tearing from his throat. Clara didn't flinch. She watched him come, watched his handsome mask fall away to reveal the monster beneath, and felt nothing but cold, clean satisfaction. Then Lachlan was there. The Alpha King moved faster than Clara's eyes could track, intercepting Caspian mid-lunge and slamming him to the stone floor with a force that cracked the ancient tiles. His hand pressed against Caspian's throat, claws dimpling the skin just above his pulse. You threatened my mate, Lachlan snarled, and his voice was barely human, his wolf surging so close to the surface that his bones seemed to shift beneath his skin. My mate. My pup. Caspian spat blood from where he'd bitten his tongue. She was mine first. Clara stepped forward, looking down at the male who had held her down and burned his cruelty into her flesh. Her wolf pressed against her skin, not with fear, but with ancient righteous fury. I was never yours, she said quietly. You made certain of that the moment you rejected me, the moment you chose politics over your own child. The moment you thought your convenience mattered more than my life. Caspian's eyes widened as he finally understood what he'd thrown away. Lachlan's claws pressed deeper. The council has found you guilty. Traditional punishment for your crimes is death. His amber eyes burned gold, feral and unforgiving. But I am not without mercy. So I give you a choice, Caspian Starfall. Exile or death. For a long moment, Caspian said nothing. Clara could see him calculating, searching for some angle, some manipulation that might still save him. But there was nothing left. His lies had been stripped away, his schemes exposed, his power rendered meaningless beneath the Alpha King's claws. Exile, he whispered finally. I choose exile. Lachlan rose, dragging Caspian to his feet. Strip him of his rank, strike his name from pack records. He is to be escorted beyond all territorial borders before nightfall and never permitted to return. His voice rang through the silent hall. If he sets foot in claimed lands again, any wolf may kill him on sight. This is my judgment. Guards seized Caspian's arms. As they dragged him toward the doors, he twisted to look back at Clara one final time. She held his gaze and said nothing. There was nothing left to say. The doors slammed shut behind him, and Clara felt something loosen in her chest. A knot she'd carried for so long she'd forgotten what it felt like to breathe without it. That night, the stronghold was quiet. The council had dispersed, witnesses returning to their territories with stories that would spread through every pack before the moon rose again. Clara Stormborn, the packless female, the branded traitor, had demanded truth-speaking and exposed an alpha's son as a liar and a coward. But Clara wasn't thinking about any of that. She stood in Lachlan's chambers, firelight dancing across the walls, watching her true mate approach with a gentleness that still made her wolf whine with longing. His hands cupped her face the way they had that first night in the corridor, tilting her head up until their eyes met. "You were magnificent today," he murmured. "My fierce, brave mate." Clara's breath caught. "I was terrified." "I know." His thumb traced her cheekbone. "You were terrified, and you stood before the council anyway. You faced the male who burned you and refused to be small." His voice dropped lower, rougher. "Do you have any idea what it did to me, watching you claim your truth? Watching you become everything I knew you were?" Heat rose in her chest. Not fear this time, but something else entirely. Something that had been building since the moment their eyes locked in his throne room, since the bond wrapped golden and undeniable around her heart. Lachlan. His name felt sacred in her mouth. "I want—" She didn't know how to finish the sentence. She didn't have to. "Only if you want this," he said, echoing his words from days ago. "Only if you're ready. We have time, Clara. We have the rest of our lives." But she'd spent so long being afraid, so long hiding, running, protecting herself from pain. And standing here, wrapped in his scent, feeling the mate bond pulse warm and bright between them, Clara finally understood what courage really meant. It meant choosing joy even when fear whispered that she didn't deserve it. She rose on her toes and pulled him close. "I'm ready." His control shattered. He kissed her like she was the first breath after drowning, the first warmth after frozen borderland nights, the first hope after years of careful emptiness. His hands tangled in her hair, tilting her head back to deepen the kiss, and Clara melted into him with a sound that was half sob, half surrender. "Mine," he growled against her lips. "Tell me you're mine. Yours." The word tasted like freedom. "I'm yours, Lachlan." He guided her backward until her shoulders met the wall, his body a furnace against hers. The baby kicked between them, and his hand curved protectively over her belly, reverent and wondering. "Both of you," he breathed. "Both of you are mine, my mate, my pup." Clara pulled at his shirt, desperate to feel his skin, and he helped her strip away the fabric barrier. His chest was a landscape of old scars and new warmth, and when she pressed her palm over his heart, she felt it thundering against her touch. "I want to mark you," he said roughly. "I want everyone to know you belong to me. But Clara," his eyes searched hers, "I need you to mark me too. I need this to be equal. I need you to claim me the way I'm claiming you." Her wolf surged with fierce approval. Yes. Yes. This was how it should be. Not the one-sided bond Caspian had sealed and never completed, but something mutual, something real. "I will," she promised. "I want to." His teeth found the junction of her neck and shoulder, and Clara's breath stuttered as she felt his fangs extending, pressing against the sensitive skin. There was a moment of absolute stillness, their hearts beating in tandem, the bond blazing gold between them. Then he bit down. The pain was sharp, immediate, a starburst of sensation that made her cry out. But before she could process it, the pain transformed into something else, warmth flooding through her veins, the bond ripping wide open, and suddenly she could feel him. Not just his presence beside her, but everything. His fierce protectiveness, his desperate hope, the 32 years of loneliness that had ended the moment their eyes met. His love, vast and certain and unwavering, crashing into her like waves against a shore. Lachlan. His name tore from her throat as tears streamed down her cheeks. He pulled back just enough to meet her eyes, his own wet with emotion. Blood marked his lips, her blood, and his expression was so raw, so open, that it made her chest ache. "Now you," he rasped. "Make me yours, Clara." She rose on her toes, and he bent his head to give her access. The junction of his neck and shoulder waited, strong and vulnerable in equal measure. Clara pressed her lips against his skin, feeling his pulse racing beneath her mouth, and let her teeth extend. When she bit, he shuddered violently against her. The bond completed with a sound like a lock clicking into place. Everything that was him flooded into everything that was her. And for one perfect crystalline moment, they weren't two separate wolves, but a single entity, joined at the soul. She felt his awe at her strength. She felt his joy at finally belonging to someone. She felt the shape of their future stretching out before them. Spring mornings in the courtyard garden, a child's laughter echoing through stone corridors, decades of ordinary moments made extraordinary by sharing them. "Yours," he gasped as she withdrew her teeth. "I'm yours, mate." "Mine," she whispered against his skin. "You're mine." They held each other as the bond settled into golden completeness, his hand still spread across her belly where their daughter kicked in what felt like celebration. Clara pressed her face into his chest and breathed him in, pine and wood smoke and mate, the scent she would wake to for the rest of her life. "I love you," she said, and the words came easy, natural, true. "I didn't think I could, after everything. But I do. I love you, Lachlan." His arms tightened around her. "I have waited 32 years for you, Clara Stormborn. I love you beyond words, beyond reason, beyond anything I thought my cold heart was capable of feeling." The fire crackled. Beyond the windows, the first stars emerged in the winter sky, and Clara, for the first time since she could remember, felt completely and utterly safe. Spring arrived softly to wildfire territory, melting snow giving way to tender green shoots in the courtyard garden. Clara stood at the center of the great hall, her hand resting on her swollen belly, as the assembled packs watched Lachlan place the Luna Queen's crown upon her head. The marking bite on her throat was visible and proud, no longer hidden beneath high collars or careful scarves. Let them all see. Let them know she belonged here, belonged with him, belonged to this life she'd nearly died reaching. "I present Luna Queen Clara Wildfire," Lachlan announced, and his voice rang with pride that made the mate bond hum warm between them. "My mate, my equal, your queen." The wolves rose as one, bowing their heads in acknowledgement. Clara caught Morgana's eye near the front of the crowd and saw the older woman smiling with something that looked remarkably like maternal pride. 3 weeks later, their daughter was born. Clara lay in the birthing chambers, exhausted beyond words, watching Lachlan hold their child for the first time. His massive hands cradled the tiny form with such gentleness, it made her heart crack open all over again. The baby had his dark hair and her fierce eyes, and when she blinked up at her father, something ancient passed between them, the beginning of a bond that would only grow stronger with time. "She's perfect," he whispered. "She's ours," Clara replied. On a spring night when the moon hung full and silver over the stronghold, Clara stood in the nursery doorway, watching her mate rock their daughter in the moonlight. He was humming something low and wordless, and the baby's eyes were drifting closed with each gentle sway. Lachlan looked up and caught her watching. The smile that crossed his face was soft, unguarded, nothing like the fearsome alpha king the stories described. My family, he murmured. Clara crossed to him, pressing against his side, breathing in the scent of home. Their daughter made a small sound of contentment, nestled safely between them. Ours, Clara corrected, and the bond blazed bright and warm and whole. Through the window, the stars wheeled overhead, and somewhere in the distant borderlands, spring was spreading green and hopeful across lands that had once nearly claimed her life. But Clara was no longer running. She was exactly where she belonged,